Okay, well, I am pleasantly happy and surprised that you did very well on your quiz for for Martin Pistorius's story and connecting it to what we've been talking about so far. And what's exciting is that you are truly seeing how words matter. Um, and so this whole concept of what we're talking about is not only important for your own self-esteem, but also how you influence the self-esteem of others. And those of you who play roles in other people's lives, whether you're in management or leadership or motherhood or fatherhood or siblinghood or what have you, it's so incredibly important for us to pause and think about what we're saying and how we're saying it. And we're going to dig deeper into some of the psychology of how that all works today. So thank you for doing your surprise quiz. You did a good job. All of your discussion forums have been graded. So I encourage you to take a look at my feedback. One of the students in the 120 class this semester did just an amazing, actually quite a few students, I shouldn't just say one, but I took the example from one. Quite a few of you did a really good job of following the directions, looking at the rubric, and completing the discussion forum with the level of detail, connections, and extensions that are needed. So there's a sample there for you to see how to do them going forward, and hopefully you looked at that before you submitted your journal yesterday. So what's coming up is your 3 topic proposals are due next Sunday. So keep in mind that I'm not going to go over it again, although what we talk about in class will definitely contribute to possibly IPC theories that you might like to use. But if you want a review of how to do that, look at the lecture for September 14th, because that was the detail that I gave you for not only that part of the assignment, but understanding the whole picture. So I encourage you to look at that if you have any questions. You can also send me an email, but I may direct you back to the lecture if it looks like you haven't watched it. All right, so all the extra credit is due by October 4th, along with your final exam. So keep that in mind if you want to gain any extra points. Now, what we're going to talk about today is the top part of section 2.4 in your textbook. And in this section, it's talking about, and we are continuing the discussion about, how do we improve our self-image? How do we respond to, how do we take in what other people say to us and about ourselves, as well as that old intrapersonal communication that we talked about earlier. How do we talk about ourselves and how do we talk to ourselves? So all of this is playing into figuring out and building what we are going to call schemata. Now, schemata is defined on page 52, actually on page 53 for you. And schemata is just the plural term for schema. Schema means it's just one. And schemata are all of the life experiences, the thinking experiences, and the feeling experiences that we have had to create who we are and how we understand ourselves. All right? And so it says here as a definition, it's actually schemata are the sets, lots of different kinds of sets of information that's based on all that knowledge that we have gained. Okay? Again, through experience, through learning, through feeling, etc. And that schemata is going to guide how we interact with others, and how we interact with ourselves. So as we're looking at how we create language and we create our reality, we want to be cognizant of the words that we choose to use and we don't use, etc. All right. So this is important for our socializing, the looking glass theory. And as many of you identified when looking at the TED Talk, is that he had plenty of schemata inside his brain before he got the brain infection, during the brain infection, and then many of you commented on those two crystallizing moments. That's what we talk about in communication scholars. A crystallizing moment where there was a combining of elements to make him have a new thought or a new viewpoint. Some of you commented on the one where he was sitting in the car while his dad ran into the store, and just a random stranger walked by and smiled at him. Smiled. That was all in passing. And yet it was so profound that it helped him. That was one event schema changed some of the schemata. All right. So he had one life experience that helped him to start modify and change the scripts, the videos playing in his head about who he is. The other crystallizing moment was actually when an aromatherapist observed, had the ability to look at details, his eyes, and saw the movement. And at that moment, that aromatherapist realized it was more than just the aromas, the smells, all right, the sense of smelling. It was, he's in there. He's alive and he's in there. And the eyes are oftentimes considered, a gateway to the soul or the gateway to the brain. And she saw the human being, who he is. Oh, it was just so profound. Some of you even commented that you don't like TED Talks and you don't like reflecting on them, but that you really liked this one. And it was so different. Here was a person who spoke in a traditional sense, no way, like we are used to, but through augmented, computerized linguistics intelligence, we were able to hear what he was feeling and thinking inside his heart and his head. I just love the video, as you can tell. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start to look at your own personal scripts. Now, I know that some of you did not choose to do the Myers-Briggs type indicator as a discussion forum. That's all right. You can always still do it. And if you want a report, you can always send me your results, and I'll be happy to send you one. But not for credit at this point, but just for information. But those of you who did complete it, we have some very interesting people. We have a lot of eyes, which represent introverts, which I'm going to talk about. So what I'm going to ask you to do is go into your class, and under your MBTI, all right, I am actually going to share with you a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to talk through this PowerPoint today. Right, and some of you may fall asleep, but some of you may find it really interesting. And I want you to think about what is your MBTI letters, as well as what are your numbers. All right, can everybody see that? Yes? Okay, good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to give you the communication scholars approach to personality theory and how we use this as part of um, coaching and counseling and leadership development, uh, and in sometimes therapy to coach psychologists, and how to help people work on um, understanding who they are. Okay, and there's a couple of different theories I'm going to talk about, and we use all of them in communication studies. So you get to select which one is going to be the most interesting to you. All right, so let's start off by first looking at the fact that personality theories have been around since the beginning of time. They really have. We've got ancient Greeks. God, I love those ancient Greeks if you've taken my public speaking class, beginning with Hippocrates. But then we move into more current times, and in the 1800s, there is late 1800s, early 1900s, there is the work done by Sigmund Freud in psychology, but a contemporary of him is named Carl Jung. And Carl Jung talks about what are known as four types. So I'm going to give you that information in a moment. Then along comes in the 1940s during the war, two scholars named Myers and Briggs. They were actually a mother-daughter combination. And they went and developed a personality profiling instrument with a high degree of accuracy. Is it 100%? No. But as many of you identified, you've taken this once and your numbers are pretty much the same and your letters are the same. So that degree of repetition, repeatability, creates that validity and reliability in this instrument, which is why we use this in business coaching a lot. In the 1970s and into the 80s came along a guy named Keirsey, and I particularly like Keirsey because, like me, he is a community college graduate in Southern California, out of Glendale, California, who went on to study, like me, at state universities, etc., and got his doctorate. And what he decided was there's more to Myers-Briggs than just a personality profile. What can we do to use this information to help people in specific professions? So more to come. Now, Isaacson and Behrens are the two that I use the most today, because they are the ones that came in the 1990s, and I'm still using in 2020 with my consulting practice. So if I was working with a group, and as I do work with a group of executives or people working on improving their leadership skills, their team building skills, their compliance gaining skills, all those kinds of things, I use the work done by Isaacson and Behrens. So I'm going to give you a taste of all those in this class today. All right, so let's start a little bit more seriously in detail with Carl Jung. Carl Jung identified four prototypes, okay? Four types of individuals. We call them, according to what he said, feelers, people who lead and process information primarily through feelings. He identified thinkers who identify primarily through logical, linear thinking through problem solving. He also identified what are called sensing, who are people who are in the here and now, and they process information by having to talk about them or experience the actual senses: sight, hearing, taste, feel, etc. And then he also identified intuition. And intuition is the gut. It goes around with those people who have a gut impression or understanding. So they perceive things that are happening around them in such a way that it's almost intuitive. It's like a second nature to them. All right. So all four of them are very important. All four of them are needed, necessary. All four of them serve a purpose in life, and all four of them are very good, right? What Jung told us, however, is that if there is one dominant that should not only be dominant when you're under normal conditions, but also rises to be excessive during stressful situations, you might not be able to see another person's point of view, which means you're not able to hear what the other person has to say. You're not able to listen. You're not able to feel empathetically, etc. Now, let me give you an example. I'm going to use me as an example for all this to not throw anybody under the bus. I am a really high thinker. I was a big T, all right? Especially before I went through a lot of leadership development training programs. And I had to do everything in a linear fashion, right down the line, right down the row. I couldn't change it. Don't make me go to point P when I haven't even gotten through point C. I tend to be more of the process-oriented and less feeling, because as you can see with the thinking and feeling, there is like a continuum, F and T, with 0 in the middle, meaning that it's sort of a center point and it goes out in opposite directions. So I was known as a very high thinker, according to the Jung instruments, and I had trouble relating to people who were feelers. That made me a shitty manager. And I managed a lot of people. And I had high turnover. I had employees who complained about me. I had employees who felt like they just wanted to quit because I could not understand their life as a parent outside of this thing called the job. And it wasn't until I went through my own personality profiling and got good coaching that I started to move on the continuum to have greater appreciation and respect for people who are different from myself, who would fall in what Jung would call the feeling realm. All right? So that kind of gives you a feel for what he's talking about. So that's 4. He gave us 4. Okay? Then Myers and Briggs came around, and they were actually contracted by the United States government and the military, because during World War II and on into the Korean War, we needed leaders in military. We needed really good leadership. But we needed a way to identify people who had the leadership qualities that we needed for certain kinds of jobs. We needed leaders who could be excellent on the battlefield. We needed leaders who could be amazing in the hospitals or medics working with injured during a battle. We needed people who were strategic, who weren't necessarily on the front lines, but were in the back looking at the maps and the strategies and where do we need to go and who needs to go there and who are the right people to place in, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the picture. And so they, through a whole lot of studying of Jung's 4 types, developed 16 types. So they took it from 4 to 16. And they created a questionnaire that has evolved a little bit through time. But pretty much what it is now is what it's been since about the 1960s. That is, again, reliable and valid. And they used that to be able to project, no guarantees, but to project or identify some people who have the predisposition, the schemata, and the scripts to place them in roles of leadership in different kinds of scenarios. All right. Now they added 2 elements to illustrate what was lacking and what Jung had. So what they brought in is the concept of judging and perceiving. Now this is important, or they added judging. What's interesting in the judging is that when all of you who did the MBTI, if your letters are, like I am an INFJ, INFJ. Now, those letters, okay, I am an off-the-chart J. My J score is up in the 70s, all right? On a scale of 0 to 100, 0 meaning, you're kind of ambiguous, maybe, you know, kind of fall along that line, to, and let's put this, I and J. Here's the circle again. So I am, like I said, I'm way up here at 75. Oh, sorry. Not there. On the J. All right. Versus, why did I say I? I'm at P. P, all right. In that I still am that thinker, all right, that I described earlier. But now with the component of what Myers and Briggs further defined it is that I am a person who has to be neat and organized. If you look at my stuff, sometimes you may not believe it, but I am extremely organized. I am extremely process oriented. I am very detailed, all right? So I am a very, very high J. Doesn't mean I judge people. It means that I am all about judging or placing into structure, identifying where things should be placed, all right? Organization. Versus perceiving. I never shoot from the hip. No way. Those are perceivers. They are excellent at doing this. I am married to a high P, and we are an interesting case. He just kind of flies around, knows what he wants to do, not sure how he's going to get there, but he's going to get there. For instance, he's really good with air math, rounding numbers, guessing, approximations, and I'm over here saying, you're not going to tell me that this trip to Europe is going to cost maybe $2,000. I want to know exactly how much it's going to cost. And I want to see the numbers, I want to see the spreadsheet, and I want to see where the things are going to be spent, right? Because I know you and your 2,000 will really probably be closer to 4,000, right? So that's a good balance. Good thing we're able to balance things out, all right? The other thing that they added is the I and the E, right? And as I said, most of you guys in this class are I's, right? I am also a very high I. I'm almost up in the 80 range, all right? I'm an introvert. And those of you who kind of know me, you think, what? She's so outgoing. She teaches public speaking. She does public speaking. How in the world could she be an introvert? Because the definition of an introvert is how I get energized. At the end of the day, I don't want to talk to anybody. All I'm going to do is either read a book or play my video games, right? I have to recharge for the next day by being quiet, right? Versus an extrovert, and some of you are extroverts, excuse me, and you extroverts, excuse me, you're dying during COVID. You're dying with this COVID being shut in stuff. This is not who you are. I's, we don't really have a problem with it. You E's, you extroverts, you get energized by being with people, by interacting with people. It's how you, it's so important to you, all right? And if you're a high extrovert, you're really struggling with the COVID-19, okay? So what's the purpose of this? The purpose of this, as I said, is I can recognize by taking this test, and you can as well, what are my strengths, but also what are my liabilities? If I am a high person like over here, and there's somebody in my family who is this, or my significant other was this, and if that significant other wanted to go to parties, wanted to go out and be with other people, and I did not, that could cause tension in a relationship, all right? And so we talked about this earlier in the semester where, you know, you might comply so that you can save a relationship even though you don't want to, or you might stand your ground and say, no, I can't do it this time, but I'll do it another time. Okay, and vice versa. All right. Now, I want you to look at this PowerPoint as well, because I want you to notice that it says the word preferences. You have a preference for certain kind of behaviors, which means that when you are in your highest degree of comfort, you are in that type of behavior, either an introvert or a judging or one of the others, all right? And when you are forced to be outside of that, it can cause some consternation, some stress, just plain discomfort. But when we can move you into that direction, get outside of your shell and try to do things that are to create new schema for you, oh, then that can radically change the whole schemata, and as a result, you have all kinds of new positive scripts and different scripts, which is why our term project's so important, because you are thinking about interacting with somebody who's very different from yourself, all right? And it's going to force you to get outside of a preference into thinking about communicating with somebody different. All right, so is this making sense? Does anybody have any questions yet? All right. So I want you to think about your letters, okay? Those of you who completed it, and those of you who may want to, you have an E or an I, all right? And I pretty much described what these are, and this PowerPoint is in Moodle for you to look at on your own. 75% of the American population are extroverts, all right? Only 25% are introverts. And by that, I mean polars. Most of us are going to fall somewhere on the continuum, right? And you can see what makes their behaviors, all right, come a bit of prototypes. Now, be careful that we don't stereotype. We're just talking about them in terms of a preference for behavior. It's not how they always are. It's just sort of their go-to under normal conditions or when they have a choice, right? And you can see the little differences here. All right, the next one is going to be the sensing. All right, and for this one, the intuition is referred to as N. So if your letter is an N or your letter is an S, all right, 75% of the population is going to be in the sensing, especially in the United States and especially in Western Europe, because that's how we are raised and how we're raised to value things. Okay, all right. We tend to not only teach and value, but we reward people who tend to be much more down to earth, realistic, practical, etc. But then when we look at the N, the intuition, now think about leadership. Okay? These are the people who are able to make decisions with less information. All right? These are people, no, this is like, no, my husband is way over here on an N. He has the ability to make very wise decisions based on his gut, his intuition, kind of projecting, thinking about possibilities, and again, it's that strategic kind of thing. So imaginative, very spiritual. He's so spiritual. All right, so that would be over here. Okay. All right, the next one is the T versus feeling, okay? And we talked about these a little bit earlier. Thinkers are people who like processes, who are much more comfortable with policies and procedures, who think that it makes sense to have a standard. That's why, I love rubrics. That there's a standard by which other people or myself is going to be evaluated, and I want to know what it is in advance. All right. And, it just, practical, no surprises. Okay. That's the thinker. Don't ever give me a surprise party. All right. Feelers, and by the way, you can see this is 50-50 of the population. Feelers are much more social. They, as you can see, they're really into the personal, and they also look at the past. All right. Thinkers tend to be very much in the present, in the here and now, but feelers have the ability to reflect on what happened before, in the arts, in history, in music. They love beauty, and those kinds of things. Those are very much part of our feeler population. And they make decisions based on those elements, all right? So keep those things in mind. All right, and the last one is J and P, as I said. All right, so judging versus perceiving. And judging is about 60% of us in the world, and the perceiving are about 40%. And it's interesting that the judging population are really as I said, we're all into planning. We're the organizers. We have the planners, all right? Versus the perceiving who are just open. Well, let's just see where the trip takes us. Or, you know what, right now, I want to do something right now that I never thought of doing before, and I'm just going to do it spontaneity, right? Or, hey, you know what, I'm not going to worry about developing a roadmap or a plan or even an outline. I'm just going to wing it, right? Those are our people who are successful at doing those things as a perceiver. All right, so that's Myers and Briggs. The Myers-Briggs type indication, if you want to take the formal one in our Career Center, you can go see Ms. Russell, tell her I sent you, and she will give you a very long questionnaire, longer than the one I gave you online, because the one online is free. But she will give you a long, detailed one, and she will give you a report. The report is helpful, but if you want even better information, see me, and I'll give you even more information. All right. I'm not going to talk a lot about Keirsey, other than that they are the forerunner in taking the application of the Myers-Briggs type indicator out of the world of the military and into the world of professions. He did most of his initial research working with people in counseling, both in educational counseling as well as psychiatric counseling. And from that, we learned how we could apply these to jobs, people in different jobs, and what the jobs entail and what they require. All right. His theory is called the temperament theory. Again, he kind of took the 16 types and redistributed them into 4 types. And as I said, he used those into training. Now, one of the things he did was trained his counselors to understand clients. And along with the other researcher, Bates, their research and then the subsequent training in a huge company that was built afterwards, consulting practice, they were able to teach on-the-job training, coach people in counseling to be effective listeners and observers, and to take off a filter of their own way of being so that they could bring into them the client's way of thinking and feeling and believing. It's a lot of training. It's not easy, but it's very much required as part of talk therapy, as you can imagine. Okay, and so the whole concept in the 1970s was, please understand me. Don't just hear me. Please understand what I'm trying to say. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the temperaments shortly. You can look at these on your own, but sometimes it's good to identify personalities. And those of you who did this homework assignment as a discussion forum, I asked you to identify a famous person who you could relate to. And it was fascinating to hear some of the people that you have related to, and the reasons why you feel connected with those people, which is back into this again. All right. And I'm going to talk about an N and an F, who is what my letters are, and actually one of my heroes, who is Oprah Winfrey. And this is where Keirsey comes in and says, the important thing about understanding the Oprahs of the world, the me of the world, is to understand that when we don't focus on just one letter, but we look at the combination of letters, in this instance, the N and the Fs, I am a person who I'm all about becoming, right? I don't want to be in the past or even in the future. I'm in the process right in the here and now of change. I'm a change agent. I like to change others as well as a change agent of myself. Okay? So if you have those letters, then that's where you fall. The other example is what Kiersey called the temperament, the rationals. And the rationals, ironically, is the Mickey Mouse of the world, the Walt Disney. And he was all about knowing, all right? He knew he could do things. And he kept doing because he knew that he could create more interesting, more dynamic, more animated, more clever, more cutting edge than others. All right. And so if you are in this rational, you are this type who says, I want to know how to do it because I want to do it. I'm all about learning. And I'm going to keep learning, and I'm going to keep learning because I see what I can do with this. I see where I'm going with it. I can see Disneyland, all right, in my future. I can see, blah, 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 right? All right, two more, and then we'll be done. The next one, if you have the S and the J letters, and it was interesting, some of you, one person even identified with Mother Teresa, St. Teresa now. And the question is, I wonder if these are your letters. I hope there's some correlation. The S and the J's are a combination that's all about serving. So these are the people who are not about ourselves, but are about others. These are the people who have an incredible sense of duty to help others. Okay, to serve the good of others, to serve the good of humanity, to serve the good of you as a specific person. All right. They believe in a strong sense of responsibility and as having a membership in a group who also does the same. And our last one is one of my favorite basketball heroes, is actually looking at Magic Johnson. Just love him. Magic Johnson is an artisan. And you may not even think of as an athlete as being an artisan, but they are. All right? And if you look at this profile, think about this athlete as playing with grace, playing with excitation, in the moment, the energy, love the spontaneity of the game and the fast pace and everything that went along with it. But I also want you to look at the bottom two, actually the bottom three, with grace and a negotiator, and doing. He's the doer. Now, some of you don't know this, but Magic Johnson, when he retired from the LA Lakers, he stayed in Los Angeles. And he invested in very poor income, underserved, marginalized communities. And he invested his money in helping these people become entrepreneurs of their own. And he naturally built an empire for himself, but more importantly, built empires for others, or helped them build empires for themselves. So he's very empowering. And he does that by helping other people do, right? And the grace is something important because during the height of the AIDS scandal, he was one of the first people to come out and announce to the public that he was HIV positive. And in those days, that was like a death sentence or that you were a pariah. Don't get near me, you may infect me. But he did it with such grace and such eloquence, and he did so much for education and awareness to help people be so much smarter about that horrible disease. So somebody I really admire, as you can tell. All right, so that leaves us to Isaacson and Behrens. Now, what's important about them is not only did they take what Kiersey said in that it's important to understand the client. Isaacson and Behrens said, okay, I want to understand the client or my colleague or my son or my student, but I also want to talk their language. I want to talk the language that they understand so that they will understand what I'm trying to communicate. I want to understand them so that I can help them and speak a language. Remember, we talked about earlier, a language that we could both share. So that I can encode a language that my class or my students or audience or whoever it is will also have. So that we are sharing the same code. So remember the code that we talked about at the beginning of the semester. They also focus on what I did in business, which is in organizational development, looking at the organizational climate. Now, I learned the hard way that I was a bitch as a manager. And after really about 6 years of being in management position, I went into training and development for myself personally, and I started to learn a lot about myself, and I started to change. I started to be more becoming. I started to looking at how I could evolve and therefore empower others to do the same. And a lot of it is by the work of Isaacson and Behrens, because they helped me to step back and see how my individual behavior was hurting my work unit, hurting individual people who worked for me, was hurting my department, hurting our business, etc. And through a snowball effect, my actions were not just alone. They were compounding and impacting multiple complexities of people in the workplace. And I needed to get my shit together, which I did. And I went through some more training, more evolution, more soul searching, more training, more etc., changed jobs, new people, etc., to where when I did retire from business, I was pretty good. And I'm happy to say that my people were actually pretty sad that I retired because they enjoyed working with me, not for me. All right. So what I'm going to do is send you each a handout, a page from the Isaacson and Behrens book that is going to illustrate a work label for you. All right. And it's going to tell you these things about what you are like on the job. All right. So how do you work on the job? How do others work with you in the job? How do you piss off people on the job? How do you make people good team workers, et cetera, et cetera. So those of you who did the MBTI, watch for this in a private email. It'll come to you. And if anybody still wants to do the MBTI questionnaire, send me an email with your letters and your numbers, and then I will send you a report as well. And that's all that I have today.